Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for some virtual vitamin Z as we are bringing the Detroit Zoo to you. My name is Claire. I'm a curator of education with the Detroit Zoological Society where we are celebrating and saving wildlife. So today I'm going to give you a series of clues and you can put in your best guess as to what animal we're talking about in the comment box. But before we get started, there's a couple vocabulary words that I want to share with you. I'm only going to share a couple because if I gave you too many, you might be able to guess what animal it is just from the vocabulary words. And I typed these up for you because as you're learning new vocabulary, especially our young learners, it's important to be able to see them as well as hear them in context. So today we're going to talk about habitat and what that means, and we're going to talk about species survival plans, or sometimes we call them an SSP. All right. So we got our vocabulary in. Are you ready to start guessing with some different clues? Here comes the first one. All right, so when researchers are looking for this type of animal out in the field, one of the first things they start to look for is pug marks and scat. And those are just two fancy names for footprints and poop. So pug mark is another name for a footprint, and scat is another fancy name for poop. And poop is actually a really good find for researchers because that poop can tell you a lot about an animal, including what it just ate or what it usually eats. So now these don't help give you like a sense of size as to how large this animal actually is. Fortunately, I have a ruler right here. And we're going to use centimeters because scientists use centimeters when they're doing their professional work, and today we are all scientists here. So a smaller one of these animals might have a pug mark or a footprint that goes about 10 centimeters across. More average is somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 centimeters, and a really large one of these animals could be as large as 16 centimeters across, which, if I hold my hand up to give you some context, is about my whole hand spread out. So they got pretty big feet. So that's our first clue. You now know what their footprints and their poop look like. Here's our second clue. So if the researchers are out in the field and they start finding signs of this animal's poop or footprints, then they can start putting up something called a trail camera. So trail cameras look like this, and they're installed on trees or posts, and they have a special motion sensor in them. So every time an animal walks by, it takes a picture. So the researchers can come back and open up that trail camera and pull out the little card that has all the photos stored on it. Or some trail cameras are so fancy now that they actually can send the photos right to someone's computer or to someone's phone, and they can check them anytime. So once researchers start finding those piles of poop and footprints out in the wild, then they put those trail cameras up to start looking for individual photos of the animals. All right, third clue. This is a big one. So if you think you know what type of animal we're talking about, make sure you type it into the comment box. And I'll do my very best to give the first person who guesses it a shout on Facebook. All right, so these animals are known for their distinctive stripe patterns. Each pattern is individual to the animal. So just like our fingerprints are individual to us, these animals have distinct stripes that make them their own distinct pattern. So now the researchers who are using those trail cameras can look through all those photos, and they can compare this animal to this one, and if they have the same stripe, maybe it's just the same animal walking by twice, and maybe there's more of these animals in the area than we originally thought. Or maybe there's a whole bunch of animals in this area, and we can figure that out by those different stripes on their fur. So we know what their poop looks like, we know what their footprints look like, we know that trail cameras are used to find them in the wild, and we know that they have distinctive stripes. All right, last clue, so keep those guesses coming through as to what animal we're talking about today. There are more of these animals in private ownership in the United States than there are left in the wild. That's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? All right, so if you haven't guessed it already, today we are talking about tigers. So I want to start by introducing you to the 3 tigers who live at the Detroit Zoo if you haven't already met them and know them. So Nikolai and Alexei are 2 years old, and they're brothers. And let's get this bigger so you can see the whole thing. And this is a video that we took relatively recently of them exploring the Devereux Tiger Forest habitat. So this habitat was renovated, just opened back up in September of 2019 of last year. It is 4 times larger than the previous tiger habitat. So it's almost an acre in size, which is about the size of a city block. It was very carefully planned out and thought about to make sure that it was providing as naturalistic of a habitat for the tigers as possible, while giving them as much space as we could to have them roam around and have time to explore. You'll notice a lot of dead trees in here, and that's very intentional. Anytime a tree is taken down at the Detroit Zoo for any reason, when we have to take those trees down, we try to put them in different animals' habitats. And the animals can play with them, they can scratch up against them, they can climb on them, and it keeps their environment changing and kind of dynamic, so it's an exciting place for the animals to be, and they have a lot to do. Now right here, one of the boys is hanging out next to the very large pool that's in the middle of the habitat. And tigers happen to really like water. Now growing up, we had pet cats at home, domestic cats, and they did not really enjoy taking a bath, which is very much the opposite of the tigers. Bathing the cats at home was never a very pleasant experience, and we only did it when we absolutely had to. Whereas these guys are often found playing and messing around in their pool. This guy's going to splash around for just a second, and then he's going to settle in for a very soggy cat nap. This video is actually available on the Detroit Zoo YouTube channel, so you can watch it anytime you would like. So I checked in with our animal care staff on how Nikolai and Alexi and our other tiger were doing, and they sent me some photos from a couple weeks ago now, and they shared with me that Nikolai and Alexi really like the Land Rover. So this is a really neat interpretive part of the habitat and our guest experience. So our guests can sit in the front seat of this authentic Land Rover, and they can imagine that their wildlife conservationist driving through the wild, searching for tigers in their native habitat and trying to preserve them for generations to come. Meanwhile, on the other side, the tigers, and you can see them laying right here lounging on that hood, we put a special heating pad underneath that hood, so it's a really cozy place for them to take a nap. And I hear that sometimes the boys fight over whose turn it is. But I mean, what siblings don't argue from time to time, right? So here's another quick picture of what that looks like. So the Land Rover is actually, the front part is in the habitat and the back part is in the guest experience portion of the habitat with glass in between. All right, so those are Alexi and Nikolai. They're both 2 years old, if I didn't mention that. We also have Kisa, who lives at the Detroit Zoo. She was born at the zoo in 2003. So she's 16 right now, and she'll be 17 this year. This is a video from 2017, so she's exploring the habitat before it was renovated. This was a few years back, but you can still see a lot of those really dynamic spaces that make that habitat really appealing for a tiger, giving them lots of things to do, lots of places to go. She really likes to take cat naps in the sun. All right, so those are the 3 tigers at the Detroit Zoo. And a lot of times the Detroit Zoological Society does conservation work out in the field, actually where these animals are living in their native wild habitats. But sometimes the work that we do is actually on zoo grounds. And for tigers, we do it on grounds in cooperation with other accredited zoos across the country. So what we have is called a species survival plan. And that's for animals when there's not very many of them left. And we want to make sure that we're protecting that species so they don't go extinct. So what we do is work with other accredited zoos, and when necessary, we'll move a tiger to a different zoo for breeding recommendations so they can have cubs and we can keep that population surviving. And that's so if something were ever to happen to that population in the wild, they wouldn't go extinct, and someday, if conditions changed in their native habitat, there's the possibility of reintroducing that species back out. So it's a really important project that we work on really closely with several other accredited zoos. Now, you might be wondering, well, what can I do to help tigers? Well, I've got something for you that's actually pretty easy. So say you're out on a vacation and you're driving by and you see this really neat experience and you have an opportunity to take a picture with a tiger or hold a baby tiger. Before you do that, there's a couple questions that I want you to either think about before you engage in the activity or to feel comfortable asking the person who's providing that activity. Because once you take that picture or once you hold that animal, any animal, you're saying that you approve of what's happening. So before you do that, ask yourself or ask the person, so what happens to this animal when they're not being taken pictures of, when they're not being held? What does the rest of their life look like? Do they have enough space to walk around and roam? Do they have the right food? Do they have the right care? Or you could ask, what's the lifetime plan for this animal? So at the Detroit Zoo and other accredited zoos, we have really strong plans for caring for the animals. There's a whole team of experts who work there. And we have a credible veterinary team of talented people who help take care of the animals. So if this animal is being owned by an individual, what does that look like if that person gets sick and can't take care of them that day? Where at the accredited zoo, there's other people who could come in and help. That person might not have those resources in place. Or maybe something happens financially and they can no longer afford to take care of those animals. Then what happens? Or what if that person passes away? Where do those animals go? Whereas when you're at an accredited zoo, you have to have all these plans in places and backup plans upon backup plans to make sure that all those animals are safe and well. And the last question you should think about is, what is this animal's ability to choose? Is the animal participating because they want to or because they're being forced to? So people started asking questions like this, and TripAdvisor took notice, the travel company. And back in 2016, they stopped selling tickets to things like elephant rides and opportunities to pet and or take pictures of tigers. And it was because people like you, who were concerned about the individual well-being of animals, stepped up and spoke up that they took those actions. In 2017, Instagram got in on this. Now they have an algorithm that if you post certain hashtags, this pops up and warns you that the animal that's in this picture may have been exploited or taken advantage of for a human's entertainment. And it's a really nice reminder that, again, people spoke up and said something, and this is Instagram reacting to people who are concerned about the individual well-being of animals. So if you really need a selfie with an animal, I still have something for you. You could take a selfie with a plush. What's that? This one's not realistic or large enough? I got you covered. They sell really big, realistic looking animals that you can take a pretty cool selfie with without ever worrying about the individual care of that animal. Plus, this guy's a lot less expensive to take care of over a lifetime than a real tiger would be. All right, joking aside, people like you do and can make a difference. So remember that the next time you have an opportunity. I have a fun activity for you to do. This is adapted off of a game called Hercule. And all you need is a piece of paper. If you have graph paper, it's helpful. And if you don't, you can use regular paper. But you're going to make a grid. Mine is 5 by 5. So this is my x-axis down here, 1 through 5, and my y-axis up here. We always do our x-axis first. And then on the side, I have my ordinal directions: north, south, west, and east. And if I am a tiger researcher and I'm out in the field looking for a tiger, sometimes we don't know exactly where they are, but we can give coordinates and directions on where to find them. So I'm going to make a plot on my paper, and I'm going to show you where it is. So my tiger is at 2, 3, because we always do that x first, right? And now my partner is going to guess where my tiger is. So say they say, is your tiger at 3, 3? Which would be right here. And I'm going to say, no, my tiger is east of there. So now they know that my tiger is somewhere over on this side of the game board, right? So you keep going, guessing and giving directions as to where your tiger is until you find that exact coordinate. Kind of reminds me of playing Battleship with my brothers when I was growing up. So this is adapted from a game called Hercule, which is in the family math book. And the Hercule is an imaginary character. But this game teaches you about coordinates, which are really important skills for math and science. They teach you graphing and how to read maps. And these math and science skills are really important for entry into upper education. If you want to make it more complicated, you can make a larger graph. Maybe you can make it 15 by 15. Or maybe you could put 2 or 3 tigers on your graph and have someone else find it, depending on how difficult you want to make the game. Okay, so we covered a lot of stuff today. Let's go back over some of that so we can make sure that all those skills really came out. We talked about predictions, right? You all made educated guesses based on the clues that I provided up at the beginning as to what type of animals we were going to talk about today. We talked about pug marks, which are really just a fancy name for footprints and are really important for researchers who are working in the field. We talked about scat, which is a fancy name for poo, which tells us a lot about animals out in the field. When we talked about empathy, when we're talking about caring about the individual well-being of animals, that's building empathy, which is an important skill. We talked about ordinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Those are important to know if you're trying to tell someone how to get someplace, and a lot of people still struggle with those, so they're important to practice. And we talked about coordinates. And again, these math and science games that we can practice these really important skills in fun and engaging ways will keep our kids prepared for what comes next in their lives, both in schooling and beyond. All right, so we covered a lot of things. We talked about tigers, we gave some clues, we talked about the 3 tigers that live at the Detroit Zoo, we talked about species survival plans and how zoos are working together to ensure the species don't go extinct. and we talked about actions that you can all do to help the well-being of individual animals. And I left you with a fun game. I'll actually post a PDF to the instructions and the game board for Hercule in the comments after this if you want to download that one and use it. So thanks for joining me today. Make sure you come back tomorrow morning at 11 when my colleague Stephen will be sharing some more fun activities and resources for all of you. And until then, stay safe and take care of each other.